For this next episode, we have something a little different for you. Our next guest is me. And I'll be joined by Douglas and Neil from Horton Interiors to thrash out the wheres and what fors for workplace consultancy here in the Middle East. So for those of you that still don't know me, that are watching here today, please allow me to introduce myself. My name is Oliver Baxter. I am a psychologist, I'm a workplace consultant and a public speaker that's been working in the Middle East for over 8 years now. I first graduated from Sheffield Hallam University with a master's in psychology, and I then started working for an applied practice in Oslo, Norway for 3 years before jumping back to the UK and working in London for one of the largest furniture manufacturers in the world. In the UK for 5 years and then in Dubai for 8. So my expertise has been completely throughout the entirety of international, focused on EMEA for the first part of my corporate career, then also APAC. So I'm really excited to be talking about something that I hold in particularly high regard that's still in its infancy in this market, which is workplace consultancy. It's happening everywhere else. Why can't it happen here? So tune in, listen hard. We're going to be thrashing out how we can do workplace consultancy in the Middle East.
Okay, so welcome to the podcast. Yeah. We're mixing things up a little bit today.
That's right, role reversal today.
Get you on the other side of the table, ask you a few questions.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
That's good. So topic today is workplace
consultancy.
Okay. So when you start us off?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that I've been actively involved in the region and in the UK for 12 years really, but it's still very much in its infancy, and kind of racking my brains and speaking to various clients over the years. I think it's predominantly due to the hierarchical region, right? So we put a lot of emphasis on hierarchy in this part of the world, where other regions are a little bit more democratized, and as such we often forget to survey and sample people at the lower levels, get their opinions basically to inform the design and the brief. So things are changing, starting to see a lot more workplace consultancy, appear in tenders and RFPs, and people are reaching out for support, but there's still a long way to go. I really do think that that's the case. There's a lot of cubicles out there that we need to do some work on, bearing in mind that they're from the 60s. So, yeah.
Yeah, so like I see in this region that some bits are being adopted and taken on board. Like, what would you think is being taken on board then?
It's slowly catch a monkey. So it's appearing on the tenders and RFPs, but it's not necessarily being delivered as part of the package, because it does take a little additional time to the usual process, which, as you know, clients always want things yesterday anyway. So they have to put their faith in the process that it is worth the investment in time, and there is a small financial investment as well that they may have not accounted for before. So typically the client in this part of the world, definitely not so much in other parts of the world. So if you were in Europe or APAC or the States and you throw a stone, you're going to hit 10 workplace strategists and consultants, or someone who's got employee experience in their title, whereas here it just doesn't happen so much. So if we can start to get the opinions of those people at the lower levels, then we can truly create places for the employees in general. At the moment, we're just getting the thoughts and ideas of those senior managers and the owners of the organizations, and that's what we're designing the space based on. But as you know, there's a cavern between what everybody, the Gen Pop, thinks, and management and senior officials, and what they experience as well. The corner office, the solitude, view, the solitude that they experience, the best view. That's how they've been motivated, right? And then all of the other employees are, their experience is based on what the managers perceive that they require. So why not survey and sample everybody, make everyone's voice weighted equally, so that managers get a voice, horizontally, vertically in the organization, lower, middle, higher. HR, finance, IT, everybody together, so we can create an office that works for everybody. And by doing so, it actually works out to be cheaper as well, because you're not making so many of the mistakes that you traditionally would. It also avoids, and I know you're going to really hate this word, value engineering.
We love that one.
So we're in design and build. So we love that word.
Yeah.
He's right.
Engineering out all the value that you put in at the beginning of the process, right? So that's a big problem, and that's takes time as well to go through that process. So if you can demonstrate all the cost savings that you've done before it even gets to like the interior design phase, then that's a good footing to be on. And what I've experienced is it circumvents a lot of the value engineering that happens at the later levels, where you just end up swapping out products and just destroying the beautiful concept that the interior design community have put forward. So I see it as augmenting the interior design process. I'm not competing with the interior designers, as you know. They are like my biggest clients and advocates. They're putting me forward on projects, and it's been great since I've been going independent, because now I'm free to work with anyone, whoever, wherever I want, right?
Yeah, whoever you are.
Yeah.
Okay, but there is a time involved in it. So is that obviously before the inception of the concept? So take us through that. Well, how long does it take, do you think?
So what I've tried to do is condense it into the shortest process possible. So what I offer really is not the full spectrum of consultancy services. I'm not going to be embedded within an organization for the next 6 to 12 months until fruition. I'm really just there to inform the brief, to help the client understand their clients, their people in the organization better than they did before. And so I've condensed it down into 40 days, which still probably sounds too much, especially for design and build, right? You guys get even shorter.
Finish projects in 40 days.
Well, we do, yeah. And but I think you can be engaged, long before the design starts, or in our case, sometimes we start the design after somebody's already taken a unit. But these kind of surveys with the staff, I imagine, can happen way before that.
Yeah.
So you can prepare this brief long before we need to even get involved.
Yeah. I think about it kind of a little bit as a metaphor for the legal world. So as we know, Doug has some legal trouble. No, he doesn't have any legal troubles.
You're talking to.
But imagine if you did have some legal issues and you decided to represent yourself in court. What do you think your chances of success would be in that instance with your working knowledge of the law?
Depends what I did, but I'd say fairly low.
Yeah, you'd rewatch Law Abiding Citizen and all of these movies and try and educate yourself, and you'd have a bit of a better working knowledge than you had before you got in trouble. But still, your chances of success would not be very, very effective, right? So I liken it to that. There's lots of clients that are trying to do this stuff themselves, but they don't have a common language to speak to their people about. They don't have a process that's easy to adhere to. So for me, it's a little bit like being a lawyer, being an expert in the field. It's not my job to make all the decisions. I just have to have a working understanding of the law, look through all of your casework, and then basically map out different paths, 3 different options of what I would recommend that you do. And then you, as the client, would choose which one of those destinies that you would like to go down. And then that's how it works in the legal field. And that's how it also works with Workplace Consultancy. I'm generating lots of data from the employees and presenting you with options. You can decide on which option you want or none of them, but at least you are better informed than you were before we did the surveys and samples. And more importantly, it's got nothing to do with what I think that you need. Nothing to do with that.
Yes.
It's what the employees say that they require. But if you ask employees what it is they want, they're like, I want a gold-plated chair in a corner office.
Sleeping pod. That's what
Yes, sleeping pod, yes, for sure.
But that's not what they need. I mean, maybe the sleeping pod is what they need, or a change in diet, or more coffee, or shorter working hours, or 4-day work week.
Some daylight.
Yeah, some daylight would be great. That's one of the biggest gripes that I have in this region. Why, especially we're in one of the hottest places in the world, would you put the meeting rooms and private offices next to the window, and then all the employees towards the core of the facility where they just don't have access to natural daylight? That's the majority of the employees.
So you put in 90% of the employees away from the glass.
Exactly. And there was some data released a few years ago that if you're positioned more than 6 meters away from a natural source of daylight, you on average sleep 45 minutes less. And then, of course, all those meeting rooms and private offices become wonderful little saunas. You've got to increase your air conditioning bill.
Yes.
And I think I've said on previous episodes, you give someone their own dedicated private office, on average, it's going to be unoccupied 77% of the time.
Yeah.
So we need to make it accessible to all so they can all access it, and actually bring those into the core and put people closer to the windows with good fresh air, with lots of greenery, plants, vegetation.
I don't know if you get fresh air in this region, but certainly the day.
You can't open a window, can you?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I always used to joke that you could tell how hospitable a building or a region was by whether you could open a window or not. Because if you could open a window, they potentially might jump out of that window, and this wasn't a great place to work. But
There's a window in my office, but it's been glued shut.
So we know why.
yes.
Yeah. But how open are these organizations? I mean, you've done this before. How open are they to, have these surveys with the lower strata of these people and come up with these suggestions? And how open are they to take these suggestions into consideration?
Great question. So if I can get an introductory meeting with the management. So I'm either introduced to organizations at a management level or at Gen Pop level. And whichever level that I'm introduced at, they say, Ollie, that was great. This is verbatim what they say, not just blowing smoke. Ollie, that was great, but you really need to have this conversation with management, or management, you really need to have this conversation with everybody else. And I'm like, yeah, of course we do. Because there's often a really big disconnect there. We've got to get everybody on the same page, give them the same language, the same hymn sheet to sing from, right? And then design that space based on what everybody feels that they need, and do it realistically as well. Because we're still implementing designs that are 100 years old. If you look if you look at, I've said this thousands of times, but if you look at like meeting room tables, long and rectangular, well, that's how we designed the first meeting room tables over 100 years ago. And that was for the boss at the head of the table to bark orders at everybody else and tell them how to do their job better. And then 50 years later, it changed that we wanted some like ideation and like do you think we could do this better? But it wasn't in an environment that was conducive to that. It's still a hangover from that authoritarian dictatorship where we've been told of how to do things. And even King Arthur knew that if you wanted equality, you needed a what? A round table. So the space has an effect. And like my background in psychology always makes me think about behavioral science and how the environment can push, nudge, and encourage the kind of behaviors that we want to see at work. And, furniture, the environment plays a really big part in it. But we focus mostly on the building, on the envelope, which has very little to do with employee performance. It's just the notoriety of the architect that built and constructed the facility that then you have to deal with columns in really strange and weird places.
We work on some buildings with some very difficult floor plates, but unfortunately that does still attract customers to those buildings because they are iconic buildings. So they still take units there with columns all over and weird shaped windows and stuff. So unfortunately.
And again, that's the importance of surveying your employees. So there's a company called the Leesman Index, and they survey, they've got the biggest database of how workplace relates to employee performance, like in the world, over 1 million survey respondents. And like some of the most important things is like clean bathrooms. Can you get a car parking space? Do you have a good chair to sit on? That is the number one thing that employees care about. Is do you have a good chair to sit on? Is it like ergonomic? Is it comfortable? Is it supporting you? And then number 2 is coffee.
Yes.
Can you get a good cup of coffee? Right. These are the things that employees care about.
But this survey was taken, this is a worldwide survey?
Worldwide, and this is going probably 15 years in now.
Okay, so it's ongoing.
Ongoing, yeah. The organizations that subscribe to the Leesman Index, many of them, such as like Standard Charter, they do it every 6 months. It's part of their corporate protocols to keep checking in with their employees. In the same way that human resources might stipulate that Gallup is a survey that we would do with the employees to find out how they're performing, whether they feel like they're progressing, do they have a best friend at work, which again has an influence to how many days sick and performance and all that sort of stuff as well. So there's a variety of surveys that you could do, but the big thing with any survey is make sure that HR aren't sending it out. It has to be independent. because if it comes from HR, quite often they're the ones that are being graded. So it's like the fox guarding the hen house. It's experimenter bias. You're not getting true valid data. So it should come from an independent third party. If HR are creating their own survey and sending it out saying, no, don't worry, it's anonymous. Yeah, I don't believe you. Like nobody would. So, but if it comes from someone like me or the Leaseman Index or Rework or, the Gallup, the vast array of different surveys that are out there, then you get more reliable and valid data. And that's the key, because that gives you a better informed design, right?
Nice. So when people engage you in this process, are you probably just looking at the layout they have, or is it something you can get involved in, the type of building they should be in, or the amount of space they need?
Yeah, really good question. So the amount of space is the big one. Now, we have some rules around like visas and square footage here, but let's put that to one side. Especially post-pandemic, we now have much more of a flexible workforce that may be spending less time in the office. Maybe not so much in this part of the world. We return to the office quicker than most regions, but I think we're going to eventually have to catch up with the rest of the world if we want to continue to retain our talent here and make sure that they perform well. So if you've got a greater proportion of your employees working outside of the office, then you don't need as much real estate. You don't need to consume as much real estate and furniture in that instance. So you can reduce your real estate. You can consolidate buildings. But what I'm seeing is what I call a push to premium. So in that space that is left, in that consolidation, that reduction in space, there's a greater spend to lure employees in, to get them to come into the office of their own volition, so that we're not mandating, we're not stipulating you've got to come in, because if you do that, then they walk, don't they? And they go somewhere else. So it's things like better cafeteria amenities. We really want to connect with people post-pandemic because we couldn't do it at that time. Yeah. So now we have a real craving to be with each other, and that's one of the reasons that people come in now, is more about camaraderie. It's about connecting with leadership. It's about being able to do focus uninterrupted work, because we don't all have that experience at home.
True.
2 kids, 1 chihuahua. It's a problem. Yeah. The workplace is still really relevant. But if you've surveyed and sampled the employees, if you've figured out their activity profile, what is their hybrid strategy of the organization, how does that work by team? So let's say the facilities team, they're predominantly going to be on site, right? IT, there's a great degree of flexibility there. Same with HR, finance, legal, it all varies depending on the corporate perception. I believe it should be driven by what it is that they do and their own free will. Because you could have 2 people who are both in finance, and one really wants to be in the office all the time and one wants to work more flexibly. Maybe they're a caregiver, maybe a whole host of different reasons. Maybe they have an aging parent or a young child, or they live far away. And that commute time is what's influencing their hybrid requirements. So when you can figure that out through surveys and samples, then that influences how much space. So you can save money again there. So really, really valid.
Yeah, I'd agree.
What about the space plan? He also mentioned about the space plan. So is that something that you're involved? You did speak about it last time.
Well, I'm not a designer. I don't know if you've noticed there is no turtleneck, no round rim glasses on Ollie. That's not my background. I just have a really avid interest in behavioral science and helping people reach their potential, initially using psychology, now through space and how that influences people, because it's a really, really niche market, but an important one. So when I've generated the data, I would work with a designer, hand in glove, to actualize that into a floor plan and furniture layouts and all that sort of stuff. But it isn't something that I touch. I do have a designer that I work with that knows my process, like inside out, and the language that I use. If I'm working with a local designer, we can choose to use them or not to use them, depending on their competency and how comfortable they are. But I've tried to make it as streamlined and as easy for people to use as possible, and as quick, because those are the 2 biggest issues that clients have: is speed and money. Yeah. Is it going to cost much more money? Is it going to take much more time? So if I can reduce it down to 40 days, if I can make it a really reasonable cost, then hopefully it'll gain more momentum. But it's interesting to see now, because I'm not part of a big organization where there were some barriers to entry of why a client might want to use me, because they wouldn't want to necessarily use the furniture that I represented. Now I'm independent. there's much more engagement out there from the wider community to leverage someone that has no other agenda other than to do what they say that they're doing.
Yeah. I mean, we're obviously on the design side, and I believe there's a willingness for a lot of people to take this on board, and certainly like the things you mentioned, where the collaboration areas, the cafes for people to engage with each other. Like, I feel that our clients, a lot more of them are asking for this,
Yes.
and they want this put in the spaces, but they're still asking for the same headcount.
Exactly.
This is the struggle we're having.
Exactly. So it's difficult to manage both the requirements as well as these breakout spaces, as they call it.
Yeah.
So how do we do that, and how do you educate them about extra space? Is that what you do?
That's the key, the education part. And again, it's not really the responsibility of the interior designer to educate the client on how things have changed since they last were engaged in an office refurb or refit. Do you agree with that? You turned your head a little bit.
The reason I
Yeah, that's fine.
so what we have, I always say this, that
Yeah.
it's our responsibility to educate.
Okay.
Because sometimes when clients come in, they really don't know whether they need 10 meeting rooms or not. And we didn't have this whole process of having a workspace consultant on board. So who else would educate other
Yeah.
than us? You know, if we go in there, we're sitting with the layout and we know that we can't obviously fit in
Yeah.
the 10 different things that they've asked, but we can give them 8. So it's our responsibility to give them options and
Okay.
convince them that this is what you need
Yeah.
based on the requirements that you have. But you're saying that that's not how it is.
Well, I think you're coming up with the requirements.
Yes.
That's what I think is where you need to come in and build the brief first.
So what I'm getting, what I've experienced is that when an interior designer has won a project, you know, they've competed against a number of other interior designers. They've put, proposals together and, worked with the client, and they've won it. So at that point, it's going to be more tricky to change the client's mind because they've already put something forward. And also, it's not necessarily in their best interest to create that constructive tension at that part of the process, because as long as they do what the client has asked them to done, they're going to get patted on the back and paid, which is their number one thing, right? That they want to make sure they do a good job for the client. But their actual client is the employees in the organization, from my point of view. Well, that's my client, at least anyway, is the employees in the organization, and make sure that they have a phenomenal space that augments their performance, that they're proud and want to come to work every day, and they can do the vast array of work activities that they do. So that's kind of what I shoot for.
Well, I think we got the same goal as well. But yeah, it's interesting once you finished it and you built it to a brief. How do the people come in and use it? And like, is it intuitive? How do they come in? How do they use different spaces? So yeah, all of that starts from the very top.
Sometimes, depending on the organization, I mean, this is, I think, what you were talking about, educating them before we get into this whole aspect of taking the space even. For instance, we've recently completed projects where none of the other people in the top management were aware of the layouts, of where they will sit, where the different teams will be, what the interactions will be. And after we did the fit out, and when everybody came in and they're like, oh, is this how we do things? This is not how we do. We want it to be in a different situation. That's the gap. That's the communication gap. The management is happy because it's exactly as per what was discussed, the layout, the visuals, whatever. But in terms of functionality, in terms of how the different departments interact with each other, obviously there's a gap.
Yeah.
And how do we convince them? Because it's very difficult for a management to understand that, oh, this is what the requirement is and we should actually do something like this.
Yeah.
And where and how can we involve someone like yourselves
Yeah.
at that point?
And those senior people, once they understood the floor plan, did they blow it up at that point? You had to start again?
Well, they saw it, they reviewed it, we've gone through multiple iterations, they were happy with it.
Okay.
Finally signed off, everything is okay. But the error which happened is that they did not share with the rest of the team.
Yeah.
So now, then they start asking for changes.
Yes.
Post construction.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I had something similar with Coca-Cola. So they had a layout done, design decided upon, and then they had a new CEO come into the region, and he was just like, this isn't going to work. Like, this is not how we work. We can't be like virtually in cubicles here. And so the designer that was working on the project reached out to me to come in and speak to them and educate them on how things have changed. And went, that's it. That's what we need to do. And that's what sparked like the workplace consultancy is like, well, how do we want to work? Not just how do we want to be perceived from brand and like colors and finishes, but how do we want to work? And is it, being able to show all the Coca-Cola memorabilia around our little cubicle, or is it being able to work in a variety of ways that supports the activities that we do? And that's the way that they decided to go. So that was a really interesting project to work on. That was, you know, the design did everything right. They did exactly what the client wanted, but then someone senior came up and blew it up because they were from a region that isn't the Middle East. Mm-hmm. And it's sad to say, and it's difficult to say, I'm not scared of saying it, we are behind here. You know, I have a friend that's just started a new job. They're clocking in and clocking out. If they clock out for more than 8 minutes, they start getting deducted. They're at the end of a corridor of benches of desks, and their back is just open to everybody. Like, how can you relax there? How can you feel comfortable to do your work? It's going to add an additional layer of stress, and stress really affects like the human condition. Like even your ability to make a muscular movement. The more stressed you are, the less heavy things that you can lift. So imagine what it's doing to your cognitive performance at the same time. You know, stress is cognitive, so it's going to really mess things up. So we've still got a long way to go. There's many companies that are still working 6 days a week here. Yeah. And saying you've got to be in 6 days a week.
I feel like as well that comes from the government as well. Should they not be putting in policies and legislations that should stop that, and then that filters down?
Yeah, I think so, and I think that they're on the right track. That's what they've been doing. You know, that's the 4.5 day work week in the public sector. Mm. So it's up to private to pull their socks up and follow. Because all the data from every experiment they've done around the world has shown just how effective it is.
But does it not also depend on the industry? For example, we are in construction. I don't see a chance of having a 4.5 day week. It's just not possible.
Yeah, especially for site. Yeah, unless you cycle your staff. But yeah, we have to build stuff. Yeah. You can build more in 6 days than 4.5.
Well, I think that's the difference. The key word there is the cycling. It is making sure you have the right headcount to do your job. Mm. There was a company called Moneypenny a few years ago in the UK, and what they were like a call center, I believe. And what they did is they offered half of their staff the ability to go and work from New Zealand for 6 months of the year, so that they could work around the clock, but in an ethical way. Mm. So, I mean, I don't want to know what their phone bill was, but that's a really interesting and engaging, like if you work for that company, it'd be like, wow, that's phenomenal. They give me so many fantastic opportunities. And in a time where organizations are really struggling to retain their talent. I mean, we had a very brief window where it became like an employer model again, you know, the recession looming and loads of people lost their job in the tech sector. But I think that was like 6 months. It's now coming back again where companies are really struggling to like get the right talent and here so more than any other region in the world, because we have so many expatriates here. It's like not 85%. They're not staying their whole lives, despite yourself and our previous guest. They're here. You know, we say we do the 2 years and we leave, but it is a joke. You stay longer, but we do have one of the biggest brain drains in the world, according to Gallup, and it's because. Not for any nefarious reasons, it's just because we're going back to our home country, or we're going to Australia or the States or Singapore for the next part of our career journey. And there's nothing wrong with that. And Dubai's making a really big push to make it so difficult to leave. I personally can't leave. I love it here. Like, it's just everything is done for me, and the ease of living and the ability to work and start a company I found is like really easy. Setting up a bank account, not so much, but starting a business, definitely. So there's lots of benefits for being here. We just need to make sure that the space and the culture and the management start to shift as well to reflect what's happening in the rest of the world. And then we'll be like undeniable. Yeah. Like everyone's going to want to be here even more so if we get the right culture, if we get the right spaces in place.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we're quite lucky in this region that everyone comes here to work. So maybe employers have been a bit spoiled and they don't need to put on the same like services or provisions they have in other countries. So yeah, I agree. If they could get up to speed, then
well, I mean, the packages are going this way, so if that's happening, then we need to make a correction in terms of the other
aspects,
peripheral you know, amenities that we're offering for them as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess previously coming to the Middle East was seen as you're out in the middle of the desert. But I mean,
It's a hardship
We've gone
post.
way past that now. It's a fantastic place to live. So yeah, it's just a work culture and what happens in the workplace that I guess needs to evolve.
Mm-hmm. Just a question for you, because obviously you were at Perkins & Will prior to Horton. What kind of exposure did you have to like workplace consultancy there? I mean, they're a big company. They do it in various parts of the world. I know there were teams that were implementing it to a certain degree.
That's a good question. Yeah. Look, it varied. I mean, they were good there, and because the international organisation, lots of offices across the US, there was a lot of information that could be pulled from extremely good people to educate the decisions and educate the clients. However, I'd say that ultimately it got led by the client themselves, and you're lucky there as well. Like, we got to work with great clients like Google, Microsoft, LinkedIn, and those kind of people are sort of a bit more open to it. So good clients. However, the workplace consultancy would only be brought in probably if they kind of requested it.
And of course, the clients that you just mentioned, they already have their own standards that are global.
Of course.
That's right.
And this is the biggest bugbear I have. They try to implement global standards across the board and not understanding the local nuance and the difference that it takes. I worked with Deloitte many years ago in Glasgow, and there was a facility in Edinburgh as well, and you wouldn't believe
The difference?
I mean, if you just said that they were in any way similar because the Glasgow and Edinburgh divide, you were likely to get a thump, right? But the type of work that they did was different. So, and the way that they did the work was different. So the facility needed to function different. Aesthetically, you still need to walk in there and know that it was Deloitte. But in terms of the way the space was set up, I mean, there's some things that should be the same. So like I quite often advocate for the hospitality, the cafeteria space to be one of the first spaces that you enter into, because that's the first thing you want anyway, coffee, catch up, and then you'll go to your desk. Also, it's a really buzzy and noisy space, so why not have it where all the noise is coming from, which is the entrance, the stairways, the lifts, the escalators. So there are some things that you would kind of mimic.
You want the continuity and the familiarity of going to these different places, but it should be to the region, and to go back to that, I did find that the workplace guidelines given to us by some of these companies was restrictive, and it was built around a model that wasn't this region.
I think if you have to give, and this was a different situation to what you described, but if you have to give like a handbook to the employees, you've done something really wrong. Like, nobody opens up a phone today and looks at the user manual. Like, it should be intuitive.
Yeah, exactly. I always said that the most successful designs that we do is when you open the doors, everyone comes in, and these spaces they haven't seen before or worked in before, intuitively they just go in there. Let's have a meeting over there. Let's do that, and you see how they use it. If people are struggling and what's this room for? What do I need to do that for? And they're asking a lot of questions. You failed.
And to quote Neil Usher, who famously did Sky Central in London, the workplace is in perpetual beta mode. So you're never going to get it right because the demographic's going to change. So you need to change the facilities with it. So that's where the constant assessment or checking back in with the client to see, is your space working for you? Is that semi-informal collaboration space that you put in actually being used? Or is it too close to where like a newly employed manager has come in and that they're really close to it, so nobody wants to go there and to be seen not working, these sorts of things, because then that's a tremendous waste of real estate. It's a waste of furniture. It could be rejigged, it could be reconfigured and moved to a different setting. So for me, it's not a one-time, we're in and we're out and we'll see you in the next 5 to 10 years. It's a constant process of checking back in, saying, is there anything we can assist you with? What is the sensor data saying? Nobody uses sensors in this region. Nobody uses sensors in the ceiling, really. There's a couple of clients, like HSBC are experimenting with it. JLL have just implemented a load of sensor data to manage their occupancy. And I know Hayworth have got some heat sensors that they can implement for clients, but it's difficult to get it off the ground in this region because there is the privacy and security element. But then also we're quite happy to consume more space than we need because it shows how affluent and successful our organization is. So is there a requirement to do it? Well, if sustainability is the number one word coming from the leadership, it better damn well be soon. That's important. Otherwise, we're just going to have pinball offices where everybody rattles around because we haven't surveyed and we haven't put sensors in and we haven't, figured out what the requirements
Yeah, I mean, I guess that could be a whole other topic to go into. Like, how big does office need to be to put the sensors in? Who's reading the information? How's it getting interpreted back into the next office design?
Yeah.
Obviously, big organisations that are always building offices, for them, you'd think they should be using that. It'd be effective for them.
Yeah, even just someone running around with a clipboard with the floor plan and just checking people 2 or 3 times a day.
Yes.
That's better than nothing.
Yes.
And I've got some partners that will digitize that. So they can put it on an iPad and they can send like one of the facilities managers, or, they can ask me to do it, to go around and just like check a couple of times a day. And we've got data for 2 weeks so that we can average out and see how people are moving and consuming and what works and what doesn't, how we can adjust. And, you just need to get a really good holistic picture of what that workplace looks like. We haven't even got into like technology yet and just how that is unilaterally failing everybody when they come to work and the experience of COVID. IT had their moment in the sun during COVID because they then had to make, all the servers accessible when people weren't in the space. And for years they said, nope, you can't work from home because you need to be in the facility to access the servers. Well, banks, law firms, all of those, they had to go through a massive change in order to support people when they're working from home. And then they demanded that people come back, and IT are like, well, we've just got everybody able to access this now. And then, of course, like meeting room tech, I asked, the head of facilities for one of if you think of the 2 biggest tech firms, it's one of them. And I said, all right, so how long does it take for you to set up meeting room technology? Ollie, it takes us just as long as it takes everybody else to set up. There is still not a solution. And it's because it's not just a tech issue, it's also a space and furniture issue.
Yeah.
So tech is left to the very last point. We think furniture is, but it's actually tech.
True.
And they never had a conversation around the tech. They just said, right, we've got this meeting room for 4 people, put some tech in there. Well, what tech? Do we need AV? Or is it just a whiteboard? That's tech, it's analog tech.
You can overcomplicate it.
You can overcomplicate it. Do we need all of that? And then, do we have to have HDMI and VGA? Do we have to have a wide variety of like Apple TVs and...
Does it even need to be cordless? We had this conversation yesterday. What's wrong with just plugging in an HDMI? Does it need to be the dongle? Like, is it better?
As long as I don't have to get under the desk,
yes,
rather undignified to find it.
That's a common scene, though. Yeah,
Yes.
a lot of people have done that.
Yeah. I always volunteer because usually, like, I'm traveling with a female colleague, so I'm just like, I'll get down because you're wearing a skirt, and it's not going to bode well in this scenario. So yeah, it's real world problems, but there's some easy solutions, and it mostly just involves having conversations early. And being open to feedback from the employees. But I think a lot of employers feel like it's Pandora's box.
Yes.
Once opened, how do we get it back in? Mm-hmm. But I think there's a lot of opportunities in there. It's not a virus that's going to spread. It's going to be opportunities and it's going to be progression. Everything that I recommend is based on data and evidence and research. That's what my background is in. So it's not just what I think, it's like what your employees think and require.
I imagine as well, like doing these kind of surveys and getting the feedback here is obviously quite different to, doing it in other countries, in that we're such a melting pot of people here and everybody's come from all different walks of life here in different parts of the world, and they've all got different working cultures that they're all bringing here. So does that give problems to you, or is it just more reason that we, should be going through that process?
Well, there's also in terms of security, it's like GDPR and compliance. Like if you've got like a couple of Europeans in your organization, then that throws things into the mix as well. In terms of what data you're allowed to collect from them, where that data is stored, and where is it being interpreted. Now, fortunately, I'm here, so I'm interpreting data here. I do have some partners that I recommend that have systems that are significantly better than mine for organizations that require it. But yeah, their data is going to be interpreted somewhere else. And that's the big issue, is we have to get a little bit more comfortable with security and access to data, or find better ways to encrypt it. I think we're probably there with encryption actually, but just a bit more faith, around some of the data that's being generated. Well, I suppose my question to you then, Douglas, would be like, how how do you see like Horton integrating workplace consultancy? Is this something that you're interested in offering to your clients going forward?
Yeah, we talked about this a lot, and we're even doing some marketing around it at the moment. And for us, if we can engage the client, and for me, I keep calling it making a brief. Like quite often we work with the clients direct, and although it is our job to understand what they want and bring it out of them, I feel a lot of people aren't quite sure what they want or what the options are. So for me, if we can convince people to make a brief, and then it's something very easy for people to follow. So yes, and I think it's just then the time frame issue. Yeah. As I said earlier, like if somebody like you is in there before they've even found the unit, or just when they're talking internally about what they want, that 40 days will go fast. It takes people a long time to find places sometimes, so they can gather, I'd imagine, most of that information before they've even found the unit. So and then we're talking to a client earlier, I suppose. And
you don't see like me stepping on the toes of the interior design community here?
No, I think it's about collaboration, right? I don't think it's about, I want to do this and I don't want anybody to help us. If it's going to be a fruitful, positive, add-on, why not? For sure. If it's going to make the client's life easier and my life easier to understand the brief and not just go through iterations of layouts, because sometimes what happens is that the client really doesn't know what they want, and then we just keep making layouts and layouts and layouts.
Time consuming.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And it's also frustrating to a certain extent for the people who are working on the layout. So if we have the brief, everybody is happy. Mm-hmm. And that will actually set, it'll become like a testament for all the other projects as well. So if they grow, I'm sure they should grow, they can use the same sort of guidance and we can make the layouts easily.
Because I can't do what you can do. Like, no way could I do it. Like you put me in front of like AutoCAD or BIM or something and I'll just start shaking and crying at a corner. It's not something that I have any competency around, but I do have, a decent degree of knowledge around people and performance and behavioral science and how to tease out, their requirements in space and put it together in a way that people can understand it, which I think is the main thing, so that everybody can see that this is a transparent process and we're not trying to like just take your desk away or just take your private office away. There's good reasoning behind it. If you've got like a 1-to-1 desk ratio, you've got too many damn desks. There's a waste of real estate in furniture. Let's look at that. Is it a realistic need? Some instances, yes, you will need 1-to-1. Very few, but the majority is the case. I mean, then for most, it's like you can share with the team, create a neighborhood, right? For marketing, there's 20 people in marketing, give them 10 desks, have some peripheral spaces that are work points but not workstations that they can access and use as well, and it makes for a better environment. You feel more comfortable in that setting, and it's been purposefully thought through.
Yeah, you said earlier as well that this region, we are a little bit behind or quite far behind other regions in what we're doing. But I do see some things being adopted and there is progression being made. What do you see here? Are there some good things that people doing? What do people like here that's different?
So I say we're quite far behind, but if you think about places that you would see that are really far ahead, like the States, I wouldn't agree that the States are far behind, far ahead. Not that much further ahead than us, by the way. Yeah. Europe, yes. Nordics, absolutely. Australia, really far ahead. But America, not so much. They're still struggling with the cubicle. Yeah. That is like the norm for many. But then you hear about these great case studies like Microsoft, like Google, mostly the tech sector. But if you were to look at this is a favorite of mine, Lloyd's of London. Like I had the ability to go in and see their facilities many, many years ago. And I saw paintings on the wall of the office over like the last couple hundred years or something. And the aesthetics had changed, but the layout hadn't. Oh. The layout was exactly the same. You've got like underwriters on the end, and then you've got like two guys in the middle. And it was exactly the same like 200 years ago. So we are far behind. We're not the furthest behind, I would say. But we do have some key examples that make us think that we are moving in the right direction. And there is some phenomenal facilities here, but there's also some facilities that look phenomenal, but it's only skin deep. It's
Yes, that's true.
it's just beautification and not functional space. A good friend of mine actually designed a space many years ago, but I knew the head of marketing that was in there, and they'd just moved into the space, and the head of marketing came up to me after, like, this is a nightmare. And as I described earlier on, that's the one I was thinking of. All the private offices, meeting rooms around the periphery, and all the people towards the core. And I was like, yeah, well, I'm not going to tell them.
Well, it's said, I mean, yeah, that's a fight that we still have, that they don't understand that that's sucking up the daylight. I even had a client a few months back, their current office is very much like this, but like dark walls, dark ceiling. And I tried to give the explanation about the daylight and the products of the employees. And they were like, yeah, but they're here to work. What do they need daylight for? Yeah. I was like, well, we've got so far for me to tell you the benefits and the research and stuff like that. So yeah, we do still face these problems. But I find, yeah, a lot of it is improvement in aesthetics and the finishes people use. But I think it's fair to say some of our clients are a little bit more educated now. Maybe not where it could be compared to like Australia and places like that, but they are bringing in elements that are different, and people are genuinely asking for things outside the standard meeting room. Like we're doing a lot less closed meeting rooms now, discussion booths and pods.
Open pods, private spaces,
brand new. But the fact that they're coming and asking for them and see the value in it, and then once they see it, they're, wow, these are really successful. Everyone's using them. Rather than booking a meeting room or having to go in there with old school manifestation, everyone's hidden away. They're having like much more transparency in their office. So I feel like there is a good move. It's probably way behind certainly where you think it should be. But
well, no, I think it's testament to the good work that you guys are doing. You know, nudging and encouraging them in the right direction.
Yeah, I see a lot of improvements in our design.
Yes, of course.
Well, I hope that our relationship together is a long and continued one. I'm looking forward to doing some good work with you guys and the team, and maybe helping some of your clients in some instances, move things a little further forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the sooner we can have those discussions with the client, it will just make everything a lot smoother. Yeah.
Well, thank you. And thank you for dedicating a session to a passion project of mine and what I focus a proportion of my career on, which is workplace consultancy.
No, it's been good. I think we'll do another one. We should get technology involved, and let's see where we are and the improvements that we can do with that.
Absolutely. I know just the company.
I was going to say I do as well. Maybe we can get two in and they can...
Well, we were there the other day.
Oh, yes. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, we were, yeah. They gave a good presentation. So, yeah, let's speak to them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay,
Thanks,
thank
guys.
Thank you.